I always stop those thoughts before they finished, like refusing to watch the ending of a movie you know will wreck you. What sticks with me now is how normal everything felt on the surface. I brushed my teeth, I tied my shoes, I checked my phone, all the tiny rituals of an ordinary day, happening right alongside the knowledge that I was about to do something that couldn't be undone. That contrast, the mundane next to the irreversible, was the first real warning sign. I ignored it completely. By the time I stepped out the door, there was no dramatic moment of doubt, just a steady, nervous resolve and the sense that I'd already gone too far mentally to turn around. Getting to the location felt surreal, like I was watching myself from a few steps behind. My body knew where to go, when to stop, how to blend in. My mind, on the other hand, was doing this frantic inventory of exits, faces, sounds, not in a clever way, but in a panicked, overstimulated way. Adrenaline sharpens things, but it also makes you stupid. I remember standing there pretending to scroll on my phone and thinking how absurd it was that no one could tell what was about to happen. People passed by with coffee cups and earbuds, living their own small dramas, completely unaware that I was on the edge of detonating mine. That anonymity felt powerful and lonely at the same time. There was a specific moment, I can still pinpoint it, when my heart started pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. Not because anyone could hear it, but because I was suddenly convinced it showed on my face. I tried to slow my breathing, tried to look bored, like this was just another forgettable stop in my day. Fear crept in then. Real fear. Not the abstract, what if I get caught someday kind, but the immediate physical fear of screwing up right now. My hands felt clumsy, oversized. Time did this weird stretching thing where seconds felt thick and heavy, like moving through syrup. I could have walked away in that moment. I think about that a lot. Instead, I stayed. I told myself backing out would be worse, that hesitation was more dangerous than action. That was the lie that carried me forward. The idea that once you're afraid, the only cure is to do the thing you're afraid of. That's when it started for real. I'm going to stay deliberately vague here, not to be mysterious, but because the exact mechanics aren't the point, and honestly, reliving them in detail still makes my stomach knot. What matters is the shift. The instant where planning evaporates and you're just doing it. Everything happened faster than I expected and slower than I wanted. My brain kept trying to narrate what was happening, like if I could describe it cleanly, I'd stay in control. That didn't work. My senses went into overdrive instead. Sounds were too loud. Movements felt exaggerated, like everyone was acting in a play with bad blocking. There were people involved who absolutely did not sign up for my crisis. I remember faces more than actions. Surprise, confusion, a flash of fear that hit me harder than I thought it would. I told myself I wouldn't really see them as people in the moment. That lie shattered almost immediately. Something small went wrong early on. Not catastrophic. Just enough to knock me off the mental script I'd rehearsed. That's when panic tried to take the wheel. I could feel it pushing, telling me to rush, to skip steps, to just get out. I forced myself to slow down, which felt like trying to press the brake while skidding on ice. No one turned into a movie villain. No one screamed dramatically. The reactions were messy and human, and that somehow made everything worse. It's easy to justify hurting a system. It's much harder when the system looks back at you and blinks. Even now, that's the part that sticks. The realization, mid-act, that I was in way over my head and there was no clean way out. Once that first mistake happened, everything after felt unstable, like walking on a frozen lake you're suddenly not sure will hold. The plan I'd convinced myself was solid started showing all its weak seams at once. Little things, timing, positioning, reactions, refused to line up the way I'd imagined. I became painfully aware of how visible I was, not just physically, but morally. I could feel eyes on me, not in a dramatic spotlight way, but in quick glances, flickers of attention that made my skin prickle. Every sound felt like it could be the one that tipped everything over. A door opening, a voice raised half an octave too high, my own breathing, louder than it had any right to be. I tried to project calm, but inside I was scrambling. My thoughts weren't coherent anymore, they were fragments. Move, don't rush. Why is this taking so long? Don't look at him. Look normal. It's amazing how fast your brain abandons philosophy and justification when survival mode kicks in. All those stories I told myself beforehand vanished, replaced by a single, dumb priority. Get through the next 10 seconds. Someone said something to me, not threatening, not heroic, just a normal, frightened human response. That moment hit me harder than any resistance would have. It forced me to acknowledge that control was an illusion I'd borrowed, not something I actually possessed. I remember thinking very clearly, this is the part they warn you about, the part where it stops being theoretical and starts collecting consequences. There's a point in situations like that where time stops behaving normally. It doesn't speed up or slow down so much as it fragments. Moments stop connecting cleanly. You remember flashes instead of sequences. A sound here, a movement there. The rest gets filled in later by your imagination, which is rarely kind. I became hyper-aware of my own body, the tension in my jaw, the way my shoulders ached from being held too tight for too long. My hands were steady, which surprised me. Not because I'm brave, but because fear had burned itself down into something colder and more functional. That scared me more than panic would have. There was another unexpected complication. Again, nothing cinematic, just inconvenient and very real. The kind of thing no amount of mental rehearsal prepares you for because it depends entirely on other people doing unpredictable human things. For a second, I thought everything was about to collapse right there. I remember locking eyes with someone and instantly looking away. That split second of connection felt dangerous, like if I let it last too long, I'd freeze up completely. Seeing recognition, or even the possibility of it, made the whole thing feel permanent in a way I hadn't fully accepted yet. My internal monologue was gone by then. No more justifications, no clever framing, just instinct layered over regret, layered over adrenaline. I wasn't thinking about money anymore. I wasn't thinking about consequences either. I was thinking about distance. How to put as much of it as possible between myself and this moment. That was when I realized the hardest part wasn't doing it. It was finishing it. Leaving was nothing like I imagined. I'd pictured a clean break, a clear moment where the danger stayed behind me like a closed door. Instead, it clung. It followed me in my chest, in my ears, in the way every passing sound felt suspiciously loud. I moved away from the scene with what I hoped looked like purpose, not haste. That balance was harder than anything else I'd done up to that point. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but running is a confession in motion. So I walked, counting steps, forcing my shoulders to loosen, forcing my face into something neutral. That's when the paranoia really set in. Every person behind me felt too close. Every car that slowed down felt intentional. I replayed the last few minutes over and over, convinced I'd missed something obvious, a face that lingered too long, a detail that would unravel everything later. It felt like the world had quietly turned hostile, like I'd stepped into a game where everyone else knew the rules, but me. I ditched anything that felt like it tied me too clearly to what I'd done, separating myself from the version of me who just crossed that line. It wasn't about being clever anymore. It was about shedding skin, about becoming unremarkable again as fast as possible. The strangest part was how ordinary everything looked once I put a little distance between us. Traffic moved. People laughed. Someone complained loudly into a phone. The world hadn't flinched. That normalcy felt almost insulting, like the universe was refusing to acknowledge what I'd just done. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. I felt hollow, like the adrenaline had scooped something out of me and left an echo behind. It wasn't until I was somewhere I considered safe that my body finally caught up with what had happened. The adrenaline drained out of me all at once, leaving my hands shaking so badly I had to sit down. My mouth tasted metallic, like I'd been chewing on a coin. I remember laughing once, short and sharp, because the alternative felt like throwing up. I kept checking my phone even though I knew there wouldn't be anything there yet. No alerts, no messages, no sudden proof that everything had collapsed. That silence was its own kind of torture. My brain filled it with possibilities, each one worse than the last. I told myself this was normal, that everyone who did something risky felt like this afterward. I don't know who everyone was supposed to be. I tried to act normal. That became the new job. Make food, wash your hands, sit on the couch like you always do. But every small sound made me flinch. Every siren in the distance felt personal, like it was tuning itself to my frequency. I realized then how fragile my sense of control really was, how much it depended on pretending nothing had changed. The guilt didn't hit all at once. It crept. It attached itself to random details, a remembered expression, a tone of voice, and replayed them when I wasn't ready. I kept justifying, reframing, minimizing. No one was hurt. It could have been worse. You didn't have a choice. The lies sounded thinner now, like they'd been stretched too many times. That night, sleep came in short, shallow bursts. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in it. Not the whole thing, just pieces. Enough to make sure I didn't forget. Enough to make sure I wouldn't feel clean again anytime soon. The next few days were worse than the night itself. Adrenaline at least gives you momentum. Once it's gone, you're left alone with the story you've been telling yourself, and that story starts asking uncomfortable questions. I kept expecting some external consequence to arrive. A knock, a call, something definitive. When it didn't, my brain turned inward. I replayed conversations I'd had before the crime, searching for signs I'd already crossed a line back then. Little moments that suddenly felt like foreshadowing instead of coincidence. I tried to justify it the way I always had. I told myself the system was bigger than any one action, that what I did was a drop in an ocean of worse behavior, that I'd been pushed into it by circumstance. The problem was those explanations no longer brought relief. They sounded rehearsed, like lines from a play I didn't believe in anymore. I noticed how careful I became around people. Every casual question felt like a test I didn't know I was taking. I laughed a little too late. I spoke a little too carefully. Guilt doesn't just sit quietly in your chest. It leaks into your posture, your timing, the way you look at the floor instead of someone's eyes. What surprised me most was the absence of triumph. I'd imagined that if I got away with it, I'd feel powerful, or at least smarter than before. Instead, I felt smaller. Like I'd proven something about myself that I didn't actually want confirmed. That's when I realized getting away with it wasn't the same thing as escaping it. Weeks passed, then months, and nothing outwardly happened. No consequences I could point to, no dramatic fallout. That should have felt like a win. Instead, it felt like a sentence with no end date. The memory didn't fade the way I expected. It lost its sharp edges, sure, but it gained weight. It showed up at inconvenient times. In the grocery store line, in the shower, halfway through a conversation when someone mentioned money or risk or doing what you have to do. I'd nod along while a quieter part of me flinched. I started noticing how often I measured myself against that day, before and after. Who I was when I walked in, who I was when I walked out. It's strange how one decision can become a reference point, like a private calendar only you can see. Everything else rearranges itself around it. I also noticed how easily I could slip back into the same thinking if I wasn't careful. The old justifications would surface when I was stressed or cornered. You handled it once. You're capable of worse. That realization scared me more than the crime itself. It meant the line I crossed hadn't vanished. It had just become familiar. I didn't confess. I didn't try to make it right in any formal way. I just carried it. And carrying something like that changes how you move through the world. You become quieter, not humbler, just more aware of how much damage can exist without making a sound. I didn't wake up one day and decide to be different. It happened in smaller, uglier increments. I avoided certain places without fully admitting why. I felt a jolt of tension whenever I saw uniforms, even when I'd done nothing wrong. My body remembered before my brain wanted to. I also noticed how the story I told about myself quietly changed. I used to think of myself as someone who'd almost done bad things, someone who flirted with the edge, but stayed basically decent. Afterward, that narrative didn't hold. I was someone who'd crossed a line and kept walking. There's a difference. And once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. What bothered me most was how normal I looked from the outside. Friends still trusted me. Co-workers still joked with me. I still got asked for advice, still got invited places. That normalcy felt undeserved, like I was benefiting from a clerical error in the universe. It made me hyper aware of how much we assume about each other based on appearances alone. I caught myself judging other people more harshly, which is a tell. It's easier to focus on someone else's flaws than sit with your own. Every time I did it, there was this quiet hypocrisy humming underneath, reminding me I wasn't standing on the moral high ground I pretended to occupy. I didn't become a monster. That's the lie people tell themselves to feel safe, that only monsters do bad things. I became something more uncomfortable, a regular person who'd proven to himself how flexible his values could be under pressure. There's a strange grief that comes with not being caught. I don't hear people talk about that much. You expect relief, maybe even gratitude toward your own luck. What you get instead is this quiet, persistent pressure, like the universe handed you a secret and dared you to live normally while holding it. I realized I'd been waiting for punishment as a way out, something external to balance the scales, so I wouldn't have to keep doing it internally. When that never came, I had to sit with the fact that the accounting was now my responsibility. No judge, no verdict, just me and the memory. I started second-guessing my own reactions to things. If I felt happy, there was a shadow of, should you be? If I felt stressed, there was, you don't get to complain. It was exhausting, constantly auditing my emotions like they needed to be justified. Every once in a while, I'd imagine running into someone from that day. Not a confrontation, just a look of recognition. In those fantasies, I never knew what I'd say. Sorry felt too small. Silence felt too cowardly. The truth is, I don't think there's a sentence that would have fixed anything. That realization sat heavy with me. Getting away with it didn't free me. It tethered me to a version of myself I couldn't pretend didn't exist anymore. The thing that finally slowed me down wasn't fear of getting caught. It was exhaustion. Carrying that version of myself around took more energy than I expected. Every shortcut in thinking, every moral compromise, demanded upkeep. You have to keep telling the story the same way, or it falls apart. And I got tired of being my own unreliable narrator. I started pulling back from risk in general, even the harmless kind. No more flirting with what-ifs. No more rationalizing small lines because I knew where that road actually went. It wasn't a dramatic vow or some clean redemption arc. It was quieter than that. More like deciding over and over not to make my life heavier than it already was. I won't pretend I suddenly became virtuous. I didn't, but I became more honest with myself, and that mattered more. I stopped pretending adrenaline was freedom. I stopped confusing chaos with meaning. The thrill had promised escape, but all it delivered was a longer sentence inside my own head. What surprised me was how much peace came from choosing the boring option. Predictability started to feel like a relief instead of a trap. Rules stopped looking like walls and started looking like guardrails. Not perfect, not fair, but there for a reason I'd learned the hard way. That was the real consequence, realizing I didn't want to be the person who needed that kind of rush to feel alive anymore. I don't tell this story to glorify what I did. If anything, it feels embarrassing now. Not because I was scared or sloppy, but because I was so convinced I'd found some shortcut to feeling alive. I hadn't. I just borrowed intensity from the future and paid for it with interest. What I learned is disappointingly simple. Adrenaline lies. It tells you you're powerful when you're actually just overwhelmed, It tells you you're free when you're really just unanchored. The rush fades fast. The memory doesn't. And the person you become while chasing that feeling sticks around longer than you think. If you're reading this and flirting with the idea of doing something similar, telling yourself you're different, smarter, more careful, you're not. I wasn't either. The system doesn't need to beat you to change you. Sometimes it just lets you walk away and live with yourself afterward. I got away with it, in the legal sense. In every other way that mattered, I paid. Not all at once, not dramatically, just slowly, quietly, in the background of my life. That's the part no one advertises. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. This is just one man admitting that the line between "I'd never do that" and "I already did" is thinner than most of us want to believe. And once you step over it, the hardest part isn't escaping the moment. It's learning how to live with the person who didn't turn back